And we are live. Yay. Welcome everybody who is watching. This is SolFest night number 3. And we are doing a panel called Honor and Amplify. And I'm so excited to have Carla moderating this panel this evening. And I'm going to pass it on to her. Once again, my name is Adriana Gaviria and I'm the SolFest producer. Carla, take it away.
Hello, good evening. My name is Carla Della Gatta, and I'm currently in Tallahassee, Florida, which is located on land that is ancestral and traditional territory of the Appalachian Nation, the Muskogee Creek Nation, and the Miccosukee tribe of Florida, and the Seminole tribe of Florida. Tonight we have 5 wonderful panelists all here to discuss how to honor and amplify. This is an intercultural conversation on legacy, identity, and expanding the American theater canon. I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves and the theaters that they're currently working at to talk about the type of work that they're doing. And this conversation will extend for probably about an hour, and which will open up questions for anybody who has them on Facebook Live. And we'll close by 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at the latest. So if you have some questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will certainly get to them as we go a little bit further. There are 3 kind of large categories that we'll be talking about tonight. The first is the problems and the challenges of the established canon. And the second is why identity and representation matters. The third will be strategies for making change. And again, we have 5 outstanding panelists who all come to this work from different perspectives. And so we'll be exploring this conversation together. So thank you for joining us, to our panelists and to our viewers. And I'd just like to start off and say this welcome. The rest of our panelists are in New York, so I'm quite envious, but they are all there. And where I'd like to start off is this question of the established canon, which can be interpreted in a whole number of different ways. But one of my questions is, depending on our education, when were you first assigned a play by someone, by a woman, or by a Black Indigenous person of color? And when was the first time you saw a play by someone who was not part of what we're usually taught in school? So anyone can start off, and please do introduce your theater when you begin.
I'll start. Because I can answer that question. I grew up in Miami. Like I said before, my name is Adriana Gaviria, and I'm here representing the Soul Project. So growing up, even though I was born in New York, I grew up in Miami. So it's a very different experience, right, than I had when I went to grad school out of Florida, in New Haven. But yes, I remember I was fortunate enough to have professors in college at the university who exposed us to different types of work. But the first monologue that I learned was a Brian Friel. So I was exposed to a lot of playwrights from Canada and just different writers. But I know Jose Rivera's Marisol was the first play that I got to do. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I was just so excited by that play. And that was the first time that I was exposed to a story that I could relate to. And it was just awesome.
I will jump in. I'm Mary Candler. I'm the artistic director of Hedgepig Ensemble Theater, and we are responsible for the Expand the Canon initiative. We're in the middle of our Expand the Canon festival right now as well, so festivals all around. And I kind of want to answer this question in 2 ways. I grew up in Delaware, and when I went to school, I think the first play that was a play written by a woman that I was given and assigned was Carol Churchill's Cloud 9, which is a great play, but it is also a play by a white woman. So that is exciting that we got women in the curriculum, but it was still very in one lane there. And I also got to see that play, which was really exciting to kind of see a story that looked at gender and kind of the expansiveness of gender. And Hedgepig is specifically looking at the classics through a gender equity lens. So all my life, I've been very interested in what the classical canon looked like really specifically and why it was all dead white men. And that's really the work that Hedgepig and Expand the Canon work to kind of explode, to make a more gender expansive canon and to help people with the resources for that. I will also shout out that I am currently in Brooklyn, New York. I know we've got a lot of New Yorkers up here, and I'm streaming from unceded territory of the Lenape people. But the other thing I wanted to bring up in terms of the material I was exposed to at school is because I was really focused on classics and plays written from, the 18th century, 17th century, 16th century. I was never exposed to any plays by women or BIPOC playwrights ever. And that's through an undergraduate degree and a master's degree in classical acting. And that became very fishy to me. And so that is really what brought me into this work here today. And I'm sure I'll talk a lot more about that later.
I can jump in if that's okay. And I am Rosalba Rolón, and I'm artistic director of Pregones, Puerto Rican Traveling Theater here in New York. And we have two, we're an ensemble-based company, theater company, and a presenter as well. With two venues, one in the Bronx, which is where we've been for 40 years, and 5 years ago we merged with the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, founded by the iconic Miriam Colon, and we merged and have continued to her legacy. Speaking of legacy and amplification, working out of that venue, which interestingly, us having our theater in the South Bronx, and this other theater on 47th Street on the theater district. So it's this sort of like, having which was, when it was founded, it was not a theater district yet, that area. It was a very, very difficult neighborhood where this theater belonged. And so, but my journey is very different because I was born in Puerto Rico and raised in Puerto Rico through my university years, and then I moved to New York. And so therefore, I always had so the plays or that were either by Puerto Rican writers or classic like Mary was talking about. Now there was a really interesting program for years and decades in Puerto Rico called Arts and Education, and they would bring these theater troops. I think that was the seed right there. These theater troops to our intermediate, our high school or middle school. They would come to the classroom, not to the theater. They would have these mini plays, and they would come to the theater. They would ask us to move all the seats all the way in the back. We would sit on the floor, and then they would take over the classroom and do a play, a 50-minute play or whatever the duration of the class period was. And that to me was everything. It was like waiting for that day to happen. And of course, that had its own challenges in terms of what went to the mainstream, to the main stage on the big theaters in the island, and what was done in the community theaters in the island, not different from the structure that we see today. We'll talk about that later. But it was the mix of Puerto Rican playwrights and classics that I grew up with. So it was all kind of very familiar to me. When I moved to New York, then I began to see other dynamics, of course.
All right. Go ahead.
I can jump in. Hi, my name is Jessie J Hoon. I am an associate with My Theater Company, as well as a playwright, actor, and organizer. My Theater Company, just as an intro, we are the leading producer and developer of new work by Asian American playwrights. I think the first time I saw work by a playwright of color was actually pretty early on. Very fortunately, I saw Fences when I was like 5, which was, I mean, I got like half of it because I mean, it was a little young, but I was lucky enough to have gone through my high school where I went in Chicago to be able to see a lot of plays through the Goodman Theater because of Willa Taylor, who's the director of education and community engagement, and she made a really specific outreach into public schools in Chicago. So I was able to see a lot of playwrights of color that way, including the first time I ever saw an Asian American written play, which was Chinglish by David Henry Hwang in 2011, I think that was. But being both an actor and a playwright who is, Asian American, what a shock. I did go through my time in university, which I went to Tisch here, and I would notice a great chasm between people like myself who were Asian American and seeing ourselves represented on stage in New York. And if we were, it never lasted long because I think there was a struggle to find an audience for it and B market it properly. And it just wasn't, Asian Americans weren't programmed a whole lot until very, very recently because of people like Maggie and people like Natco. And, I think it was, I am proud to be part of that, even in the year before the pandemic where we had the most Asian American playwrights being produced in the city. And then of course, COVID happened at that time. Great timing. But I'm because of just my involvement in the community and because of just by virtue of just being an Asian American theater artist, it's that really brought me and keeps me working with Maggie, and that's something I'm really proud of.
Hey everybody, I'm Dominique. I am a producer for CLASSIX. CLASSIX is not a theater. We're a collective of artists and scholars interested in really helping to ask the question, to riff off of Toni Morrison, classic for whom? And really trying to get to the root of like who classics as an idea belong to and why those ideas seem to never mean Black artists other than Lorraine Hansberry and August Wilson. As for myself, I'm from Texas. I went to a segregated high school in Texas that was primarily Black and Latino. And so I think the first play by a Black writer I read was Raisin in the Sun. But maybe more importantly, I didn't really understand that like color conscious casting, right? Like just was the norm because there was nothing else to pick from. It was just like, we have Black and Latino actors. That's all we're gonna cast, right? And so then getting into college, it was like, oh, white people act? That's really weird. Like, and it's really weird that like they are assumed to be the best people for these roles when, I don't know, I feel like it's just not, it's a good lie. It's a great ruse that gets told, right? And then I think the first one I saw performed was a play by Regina Taylor called The Trinity River Plays, which is about the neighborhood I'm from. And so that was like a wild moment of just like, oh, this is about us, right? Which is really cool. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And this very much, your answers have already kind of led to another question about, or I think most of you like have answered when you first saw yourself perhaps represented on stage. But with that, the importance of learning kind of where our narratives and our history come from, right? How is that? How basically, I guess what I'm asking is what do we risk in what you experienced and what we've learned? What do we risk by not expanding this canon, right? Is it bringing in people at a younger age? Is it being able to identify with people on stage? Is it a certain story or a specific locality? Like what, in your experience, like what are some of the biggest risks for what's kind of stood as, quote, large American theater for years? What's at stake?
I think it's like the thing at stake is a lie, right? Like I think the thing that becomes at stake when you don't include voices from everywhere in particular, but like if you want to just like hone in on America, if you don't include non-white voices in America, you risk this really good ruse that I think America is great about, which is that like it makes you believe that maybe this empire, maybe this country should exist. And I think that without the importance of counter narratives, without the importance of narratives of counterinsurgency, you miss that maybe it shouldn't. maybe like a nation built on stolen land and stolen labor isn't actually a nation that deserves to exist at all. And I think that that American lie that is that we're really good at telling ourselves, and the way the American memory oftentimes is so short, right? I think that the sort of the risk of Tennessee Williams, the risk of an Arthur Miller exclusive canon is it actually can't get to the heart of the ongoing state of terror that this empire continues to cause, and that lie is really dangerous.
Yeah, to follow up on that, it's you know, I think that one of the reasons why I make and produce theater is because I'm really interested in the conversations that an audience are having when they leave the theater. What are they talking about? What are they challenging in their lives? And the accepted canon that has been prevalent for a long time has a narrow line of questioning about the world that we live in. And if we can expand the voices and the questions that are being asked in the room, then we can potentially tackle bigger world issues, and we can really bring into a cultural consciousness some ways in which maybe we don't want to accept and shouldn't accept the default of whiteness as the norm. Like, it helps us challenge that is a default and starts to take that down. So I think the risk is complacency.
I think something further, totally agree with both of what's been said. Because of both structural, logistical, economic reasons, and because of inherent systemic inequality, you have theater audiences and theater communities of theater makers that are professionally employed by large companies becoming whiter, becoming richer, and we risk staying inside a bubble of that's again upholds a system of white supremacy, a system of exploitation, and in reaction to that, and both in reaction as well as in reaction to a lack of accessibility for working class audiences of color, what we risk by not increasing access to those communities, but also telling these stories, is irrelevance as our country becomes itself more diverse, and as young people, especially young people of color, look to culture for something that reflects them. If our art form and our industry can't reflect what's happening in their lives, and if they can't see it, our art form risks irrelevance, and it risks extinction.
This is a really profound subject because it is sort of like a two-edged sword in a way. I believe that the conversation about representation in the past year or recently comes with an assumption that we all are talking about the same thing, and we might not all be talking about the same thing. When we're saying representation matters, or what are we risking with the canon, what are we talking about? Are we talking about mainstream? Because if so, I believe we run the risk of ignoring the more than 60 years of a powerful, massive movement of theaters of color, of all of us, between all of us, and I'll just speak for the Latinx theater history. We're talking about massive output of work, of plays, of productions, of viable careers. Yes, there's glass ceilings full of scratches. I'll get to that. But the fact that this movement not only has progressed and survived, but continues to grow, is something we should not put aside in an effort to call attention to what's happening in the mainstream. And I feel that too often when we're saying, I don't see myself represented on stage, I say, well, I see myself represented all the time on stage. Throughout the country, in our Latin theaters that were doing productions all the time. Now, if you ask me, do you see yourself represented on the mainstream, on Broadway or in primarily white institutions? Then we can have that. Then we'll have that conversation. Obviously, no, that doesn't happen as often. But I want our young people, our students, everyone to know that there's a place for them in the American theater in this country, because we've been building it with our blood, sweat, and tears for over 60 years. And is there to represent all of us.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. And when it comes to some of the questions of accessibility, one of them too is where is it located? And we have our panelists from New York. I'm currently in Tallahassee, Florida. And so the access sometimes has to do with locale. But I'm sorry, Adriana, I didn't leave you a chance to respond and contribute to this.
Oh, no, I was just so excited that Rosalba brought up that point, because I just wanted to talk a little bit about my trajectory, because I went through, I went undergrad, graduate school, and then boop, I entered the industry. And so my entry into the industry was the regional circuit, basically, right? Like the regionals. And so that's what I was exposed to. So it wasn't until Encuentro with the Latinx Theater Commons and getting to go to LA with a Latino theater company, and then just being in the room with so many other theater companies that had been doing work that how do I phrase this? Not waiting around to have work produced, because when I graduated, that was my understanding. As an actor, I graduate and I wait to audition until the roles become available for me, and nothing was happening, right? They were we know what kind of roles were available. And so that was my first exposure to all these theater makers, it was like a rich room of experience and knowledge and theater making that I had not been exposed to before. And it was, for me, it was a career changing moment. And that's why when I came back to New York with David Mendizabal, who was also there, that's kind of where the Soul Project was born for me. It was, Jacob also was inspired because he was, in the Latinx Theater Commons at that time. So just at that moment, there were so many of us experiencing the same thing, that Encuentro, the Latinx Theater Commons during that time, was such a huge seed for all of us to come back and just start creating really exciting stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that point up, that initially my trajectory, I was not exposed to that. And when I was like, oh my goodness, look at all this. And so I'm glad, Rosalba, that you brought that up.
And if I may, I just to clarify precisely, because there are geographic differences. Of course, you're thinking about, my goodness, Teatro Campesino, the influence, right? And an entire sector of the country, if not in the entire country, but there are pockets where this is not happening. So our challenge, yes, is to continue to push that envelope, to make sure that we have our voices heard in this mainstream and in these conventional settings and these regional settings where they do have access to our kids and our schools and everywhere with the output of what they produce. This is where we can make a difference.
I also, sorry, I would love to also jump in, and it's like, you know, from my perspective, the lane that I'm driving in here, it's like looking at regional theaters and like why we're still only doing mostly plays by white men at these classical theaters. And that's not to say that there hasn't been a ton of work done around that, but it still feels like they're just not gaining the traction that we want them to gain. And when these plays are being done, be it like, okay, we're actually going to produce a classic play by a woman, or wow, we did this play with an all-female production team. There's like such hoopla around the fact that it's being done. Like, ooh, the first ever all-female production team. And I'm like, cool. Could we like make this more of a norm so that we don't have to celebrate it every time? Could this just be normal? Could I also see beautiful Latinx plays across Broadway and at regional theaters across the country that aren't only doing Latin work? Like, it's about like making it more ubiquitous, you know, like getting it out there into, I guess the word is mainstream, but I don't always know that regional theaters are all mainstream, but just like, so it's the norm, not the exception.
I also would love to jump off that, and there is like, to me, I'm always examining like why the norm is what it is, and I think that there are a lot of structural and systemic issues that are directly leading to this lack of representation, both in the mainstream and in more regional companies. And I think those issues, I think, come from largely outside of the industry itself, and they have to do with disparities in education, segregated schools, healthcare disparities, the disparities in housing, et cetera, et cetera. And I think if we want to address the issue of not having enough representation with the industry, I think the question then is, well, why can't more people of color, why can't more marginalized people enter the industry? What are the structural barriers that are preventing them from being able to start a career in the arts and also have a comfortable and dignified life? And so I think part of what we need to do, as well as, you know, in the industry, as we all said, building on what we already have in terms of theaters of color, in terms of expanding the canon within what we already have, we also need to look at solutions to the issues that cause these disparities in the first place. And that means like stuff like tuition-free colleges and Medicare for all. We need to look at issues that will not only expand the canon, but, you know, expand our audiences. You know, we need to look at ways we can address the system at large, because not only will that help us address disparities within the industry, it helps us address them in society at large. And when we do that, theater's healthier and society in general is healthier.
It also is one of those things, I think, Jessie, to your point, right? It oftentimes feels, at least I think to me, that one of the problems in that is that there is this sort of assumption, this is maybe less about representation, but like there's this assumption of progressivism when it comes to our industry, right? When there's this assumption that like, oh, we are all sort of on the same page about like how we deal with these issues, and the way we deal with these issues is like we make a play about it, and that play makes you feel something, and that feeling translate, like it's a very like an affect theory way of thinking about like relationship between story and audience. I didn't mention this earlier, I'm a director, and so this is really sort of the bread and butter of what I think about, right? But then like you look at other industries, I'm thinking specifically about film, right? Like what is Marvel really good at doing? Marvel's really good at telling people why they should maybe join the military, why they should maybe really, really like align themselves with the apparatus of the state, right? Like we don't have, and I think theater is sometimes really bad at this. We don't have a sort of counter to that like state sanctioned propaganda. And I think about like writers like Theodore Ward or Alice Childress, who, when they were alive, were writing for communist newspapers in Harlem, right? Who were writing and were eventually, like Theodore Ward, like the reason we don't talk about him is because he gets blacklisted. Because it's like, why is this man spending his free time writing about communism and Black people so openly, right? And so I think that there also fundamentally is a way we need to change when we think about how we make theater and what theater can do, right? And like not be like romantic about it. Actually, what can theater do? Because I don't know. I feel like we've been going on this feelings thing for a long time now. But like donors at like a lot of these theaters that we're talking about with regards to like the mainstream, right, are still racist. They still only give their money one way, right? Like, and the sort of compound inequalities, despite no matter how many good feel good, I want to be a good liberal plays you throw at it, doesn't seem to actually get us anywhere or move us in any direction. And I think that's oftentimes just back to the original point of like, there is an ideological gap happening in so many of these places because they are identityless.
Thank you. This is amazing, and it actually kind of segues into my next question, because when we talk about identity and expanding the American theater canon, what often comes up is why is it important to have diversity backstage, right? And we can understand oftentimes people talk about a directorial vision, but for our audience, if you could talk about some of the reasons why it's important to have a diversity demographically and a diversity of mind when it comes to designers and production teams, so that it's not just about the people that we see on stage and the bodies that are kind of before us, but how, and perhaps even an example or so of like how that contributes to hopefully pushing this envelope, right, of what it is we kind of see as what we think of as the final product, but where in the process does that also happen? Is my question.
Well, the perspective of the creative team and the perspective of a production team is crucial, I think, to the completion, to the expansion, just when reaching a production process and its actual results. So to me, having those diverse perspective can only add to the richness of the process. And we've experienced that. And I think that we, in our own worlds, like in my world, I really search for that. I mean, we are primarily founded as a Puerto Rican theater company, and our production team and our staff just profoundly diverse within the Latinx spectrum. And we have, designers from Dominican, Peruvian, Venezuelan, and I can't tell you the richness that all that brings, and sometimes even the imagery that it brings to a conversation when we're talking about something that we all think we know that what we're talking about, and all of a sudden another voice says, well, I don't understand it that way. I see it this other way. It is beautiful. It is beautiful. So I do think that those outfits or those productions were not taking advantage of the potential of a diverse production, and creative forces are missing out big time.
I'll also jump in. I mean, I think the way that theater is structured too, in terms of like a production team and you've got your cast, can lead to a lot of hierarchy. And there is some natural hierarchy that's very helpful, right? But there's also some hierarchy that can be really damaging. And if you're going to approach a play and have a very a diverse cast of characters, especially if it's a culturally specific work, which perhaps we'll get to talk about more later, and then you have a production team that is not diverse, there's kind of an exploitation in there that is pretty uncomfortable and could be not very supportive to the cast in the room, but also isn't really necessarily telling the story that it looks like we're telling. If like what the audience sees is this visual, but that's not actually what the foundation that it's based on. It's just not an authentic way of really presenting that play. There's like kind of a lie at the center of it. So I think that it's pretty important to build that from the foundation of the play up.
I think like even more than like authenticity, it also just makes, it doesn't like, right, like when we think, it makes it harder to push actors to make them better, right? Like I feel like oftentimes when the things you're naming happen, Mary, where it's like, oh, we have this really diverse cast and like that is great, and then like the production team is all, you know, let's say tall for the time being, it just results in this thing where it's like, what are the actors generally having to deal with? Well, first, they're having to struggle against this team's idea of how these people should be living, right? There is already, in some ways, before you even get to the rehearsal process, a disconnect. And like, I think about this a lot, like whenever you see plays that are like about microaggressions, right? Like, and it's a director who's directing it, who's not, I'm speaking specifically like about like racial microaggressions, and you see someone who's not a person of color directing it, and it gets to that moment where like the microaggression happens, and it just, the play continues barreling through, instead of like, you know, that moment, that pause that happens, that like, did this just happen to me? Am I really experiencing this moment? That moment of like true surrealism that kicks in, that like happens in real life, is so oftentimes missed in those moments, right? And the fact that those moments are missed means that there is now there's an ingredient missing from this production. There's an ingredient missing from this performance that is going to make it richer, and I think sharper and maybe more useful in having the conversations that people want to have about these things.
I think also from the perspective of just like a work environment and, you know, and labor relations, actors aren't dramaturgs, and, you know, asking them to be that in a production that is about their own culture, but is not helmed by a creative team that understands that culture at all, that is like approaching that culture from an arm's length, it puts the actors in a really, really tough position in which they have to act both as, you know, performers who are, you know, taking direction, but also as representatives for subject matter that might be, you know, uncomfortable and traumatic for them to have to divulge like research about. It's not, you place a responsibility on the performer that they shouldn't have to have, but having people of color in the creative team and having them part of the process, it creates an environment where actors are comfortable just bringing themselves, and they don't have to be a representative of anything larger than the performance and that character, because they know they are safer in the hands of people who actually understand that culture and that community.
If I may, Jessie, that's such an excellent point, because I can, you know, I have some examples now of actors who have shared with me, like, oh my goodness, I don't have to be fighting for how to do my hair, you know, what kind of hairdo that this character needs to have, because this person doesn't understand it. They see my face and they see a certain kind of hairdo. I mean, something that is apparently simple, but then in this particular case, this actor said to me, you know, I just had to rebel. And even that small act of rebellion took a lot of guts, but she did it. She did it. He says, you may see me that way, but this is ridiculous. This is not how we do it, you know. Now, who do these people talk to? And I want to add the whole role of the stage manager, which is such an important role, and how often the actors are in the hands of a stage manager that just can't make that connection necessarily with some of these anxieties that emerge within the acting pool, which is at the end of the day, the one standing on stage in front of an audience.
I keep thinking about this question, and then I'll think of an example, and then I'll just go, oh, but the role of this person, no, but the role of this person, no, but the role of this person, and it really is a collective effort, right? Because, so a couple examples, you know, you go into an audition and you're speaking in Spanish, but no one in the room speaks Spanish. So then why am I auditioning in Spanish if no one understands what I'm saying? Or you're reading something and I'm like, should I correct this? And then all of a sudden you're auditioning as an actor, but then you're rewriting scripts for people. Another example was a group of us were doing a show, and the marketing department had come up with some really great ideas to promote the show. So those ideas describing, you know, using words as spicy, right, to describe, yeah. So it's like it's so important. And then even with the stage reading that's happening on Thursday, La Greña, the ensemble that needs to be put together for this play is so important. And I just kept on imagining, oh my God, what if I wasn't here? What if I wasn't here and some other casting director was trying to cast this play? I just don't know what would have happened, because you're not dealing with Latino, just Spanish characters. You know, if first of all, the play is in Spanish. Second, they're Dominican women, and the setting takes place in a salon, right? And so you need that rhythm. You need these characters to go back and forth and everything. And then there's also the importance of well, these roles have different age ranges, right? So there's so many aspects to casting also that's also very important. So even casting directors, right, having that diversity in casting directors, because they're the ones that are bringing people in, and yeah, and it's just it's just so important. And so I just kept on saying, oh no, but this person, and then this person, and this. So it's just such a group collective effort.
Yeah, this is also like goes back to everything I think about in terms of like structural issues, because if we want to get more people of color into creative teams into casting, we need to consider what that takes to in our current system to get there, because I until very recently, I believe most casting offices, I believe the way to break into them would be an unpaid internship. And what do you think is the demographic that can afford to do an unpaid internship in New York City? It's one of those structural issues where it's like banning unpaid internships and tuition-free college. It becomes even more pertinent to the discussion of bringing more diversity into these spaces. It's a really, really important question of like what stands in the way of doing that.
I thank you for all of this, and you've already segued to kind of our third chapter, which is strategies for making change. And what seems to have been addressed are kind of three different threads. The first is the disparity between our education or our hometowns versus what else is happening in the country, in metropolitan places, touring companies and festivals, and how we can gain access to that. And perhaps our new Zoom world will provide some possibilities. The second is the pipeline, right? You know, that has to do with all of our structural issues, from financial to educational to funding opportunities and so forth, and biases that go into that. And the third is the ideological, right? Kind of what is the premise for, are we all on the same page? And even within communities of color and within theaters of color, there still can be the strongholds that we think of, or these 2 or 3 dominant playwrights, and there can still be bias about what we think what others might think a Latinx play is about, or who we prioritize within certain communities. So my first question really with this about making changes is what do you or your company do to pick your season to increase visibility, or how have you been chipping away even at homogenous ideas within our own communities of color, right? About what a specific type of theater is supposed to be like. And if you have some things that have worked, or maybe things that haven't, or things that you want to do next, or the company wants to do next, we'd love to hear them.
Well, that's how much longer do we have? This is really important. This is crucial because what can we all do, right? I have had most of in our case, or at least in the Latinx theater community, probably the same Asian American and Black community. We are mostly structured as nonprofit theaters, and we operate within that structure with a few exceptions. And so we haven't really addressed the class structure of our field, but there is certainly there. I mean, we talked about even how it affects our audiences, right? And their ability to attend or not some of the performances and all of that. So there has been this push for primarily white institutions to diversify, which I am calling it just stop forcing them to be something they're not. Because I think that the weight of the investment, and I'm not talking only about money, but attention, branding needs to be on our side of the fence so we can build healthy collaborations with those primarily white institutions who wish to be talking with us and embarking in projects. And believe me, we do, and I know you know this, in my heart, I know we have plenty of allies. And I want to acknowledge that and recognize that we have many allies in the white community, white artists who have been our partners for years and decades. And we have struggled together on this because, yes, there are rural white community theaters that are very poor. They're not everyone is privileged white. And so we need to just understand what are these structures and how they work. And I think that, so two things. One is, in speaking with our philanthropy partners and friends who are in philanthropy, I am just trying to encourage them to invest in these possible relationships, but there's so much they can push, how do we grow? How do we make a bigger impact? How do we be? We don't need to be a destination in terms of career viability. We could be the first stop for many of our artists who then can go into big commercial careers, and all of that is valid. And I think we tend to sometimes punish our own people when we have those ambitions, and we need to stop that. I think we need also to give ourselves permissions to expand our repertoire, to expand the type of thematics of things that we talk about, of things that we approach in our seasons. Because I believe at times we're a bit restricted. There's so many family dramas you can write, and identity plays you can write. What is an identity aesthetic? Type of aesthetic. All of these questions are something that we need to address in our own companies, within our friends and allies, and what does it really mean? But I don't think that there's an easy answer to changing a whole system that's very set in their ways, but we certainly have got to break through that, and we can do it collectively. So I am a strong believer in collaborations, intercultural collaborations, with people that look like all of us in this room right now, and with all those who are not in this room right now. How can we build those collaborations and really continue to push the envelope so that we can be stronger in our own communities, but we also add to the value of these careers that need to be viable in more ways than one. And we cannot sustain the entire field ourselves through our institutions.
Yeah, CLASSIX again is not a theater, and so we don't necessarily, I think, in a maybe slightly different way. We don't have to think about or in some ways care about what a theater audience wants, because in some ways that just sounds really boring. But for us, our biggest, I know we are very similar to the Hedgepig, right? Like we are working with playwrights who are primarily no longer alive. And so our focus, one of our main focuses, is really on education. And so our, like, just a thing that we found worked, right? Like we did a collaboration with Princeton in New Jersey. And for that, like one of the big things was like, how do we show you and your students, but not just your students, like the wide reach of people who come and care about Princeton, what 3 different types of Black plays are structurally and how they function and what they do, right? And then how do we really partner with other schools, be they HBCUs or PWIs, to really talk about the ongoing history and sometimes the collapse of Black theater in this country and what happens to it and why that happens and why there seems to always be a reemergence. And then I think the other thing, which is more personal to me, that I often think gets left out, and I'm really grateful for CLASSIX being founded by a director. Woye Tempo is always great about this. Like, we need to be talking about directors, like actually, and sometimes practically, right? Like when we talk about the canon, we do that when we talk about like the canon and like reimagining it. I often find that we're not talking about the necessity of having directors who can meet the work, right? Like, because we can't pretend that there isn't a kind of segregation happening in the way we think about who gets to direct plays, right? Like white people can direct any play from anybody they want for whatever reason, right? Like, which is in some ways insane, because it's like, what actually do you know? Maybe even about being alive and being in the world. But then when it comes to like directors of color, we are often siloed into like, you are a Black director, therefore you direct Black plays. You are an Asian director, therefore you direct Asian plays. You are a Latinx director, you direct Latinx plays, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if that is the only way for us to be hired, then we must also have an understanding that we are the ones too, when these plays get produced, we need to be ready to answer the call to direct them, right? That's actually like so important. And because like, you know, a white man can direct 50 productions of an Arthur Miller play a year. And then it'll just be like, oh, he didn't have anything on set. That's so creative. And it's like, girl, I was 2 once too. I could strip a thing down and make it nothing. You know what I mean? Like there have to be other ways to think about these texts. And I think that there really needs to be a focus in the same way we focus on playwrights of color, also in directors of color, in saying, how do we support these people so when these plays get produced, we have folks at the helm who are ready for it and who can not just do the play, right? Like we've all seen the same production of Raising the Sun, but can actually tackle the play from a perspective maybe we've never seen before and have that be really exciting.
Yeah, from Mai's perspective, a lot of our work is focused on development, although we also produce and we also collaborate with other companies. We're collaborating with Hedgepig at this very moment, which you can watch until the 23rd. We're collaborating with Soho Rep and the Public Theater next year. But a lot of our work is focused on developing playwrights. We are strictly a playwright-driven theater where it is like, it's not really project by project, but it's playwright by playwright. And if a playwright feels that they need to use our resources to work on this project this time and this project that time, that's totally okay. We're committed to their growth as a writer and their ability to work on whatever is moving them at the moment. And so a lot of the writers we work with are people we have developed work with before, or are part of our writers lab, which is 33 people right now, all across the country, which makes it hard to create meetings sometimes. But we are really, really committed to making sure they have the resources they need to grow in whatever way they need to grow at that time. But I think for me, what's really just made me so proud about the work we're doing is that a lot of it is rooted in really basic material needs. Like we're able to, thanks to a bunch of very generous donors, we were able to give out over $4,500 micro grants to specifically people of color, disabled and trans artists across New York. They allow, I myself was part of an effort to raise awareness about the New York Health Act, which is our state level version of Medicare for All, which would create a single payer system in New York State. We abolished 10 out of 12s. We are making sure that nobody at Mayi works unpaid ever, and everybody makes a living wage. These are really, really systemic issues that we really want to think about. We, you know, the reason I'm very passionate about Medicare for All and decommodifying housing is that we saw these issues take place over the pandemic, and we saw these issues decimate the lives of people that we know, artists who have worked with us, just, you know, anybody who is pursuing an arts degree around the country or an arts career is facing potential ruin because of these very, very basic needs that are currently being treated by our country as commodities. So a lot of what our mission revolves around is making sure that the people who work with us are taken care of and have what they need to survive, but also trying to create a system in which we don't need to do that, in which, you know, everybody has their basic needs met, in which healthcare and housing and childcare are human rights and are thus not barriers for entry for being an artist and for being a theater worker. And so a lot of the work around Mayi it's playwright driven, but it's also very, very much labor driven. And we're really, really proud of the work we've done both digitally. We were proud of our collaborations in person with So Rap in the Public and Bushwick. Yeah, it's been a really, really heartwarming thing to see that work sort of help people get out of really rough situations during the pandemic and, you know, blossom into these really, really great new works and these new productions of stuff you can watch right now until September 23rd. Hedgepig and Mayi, what's up?
Share the information, please.
We will. Mary, go ahead.
I mean, I just want to yes and everyone. And I also want to say, like, man, we need more funders. We need more funders who are really serious about artists getting paid a living wage, and about letting us have longer rehearsal periods that are actually conducive to living a life and supporting yourselves. And so if you are one of those funders, just like us on Facebook right now, and we'll reach out.
A couple of things, Jessie and Dominique, everyone, it's just, I think that when we look at our season structure, when we look at what you're doing, all of this is like an X-ray of our core values, especially our collective core values, right? The fact that the pandemic put us to the test. When we were hit, we have to close. Well, every single artist who has a pending contract with Pregones, Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, is going to get paid in full for that contract. And we did, and we went like you did. I remember because I talked to Ralph about the different fellowship that we were distributing with the artists, because it was unthinkable that all of a sudden our family, right, was put to the test in such aggressive ways. But a couple of things that brings to the surface, which is one, it is important that we continue to push the envelope, that we continue to penetrate these big structures, but we need to guard ourselves against secretly looking for validation in those structures, because sometimes I see that it's like the validation is, if I make it to the and I understand the importance of it in a very practical way and artistically, but sometimes I just worry that in our collaborations, we're not being firm enough when we do collaborations with these institutions, with our friends, and some of them, and we are having current conversations with large theaters, And it is very much on the table that this is to be an equitable conversation, an equitable partnership. And how does that look like? And, so because otherwise we become some sort of the go-to organization for them to be diverse. We know the story, but there is, we have friends in some of those institutions who really want to push those institutions, and believe me, there is a difference between those who approach us with that kind of respect. And I always tell them, we know respect when we see it, and we know disrespect when we feel it, right? And so there was I'll give you a quick example of a huge institution who called me once. The assistants of the assistant of the assistant of the assistant called me. I said, well, I'm the artistic director of this organization. You have your artistic director call me. And it's not that I'm a snob. I'll talk to anybody, but I just didn't want to engage in that conversation from that perspective. And then when that happened, the purpose of the call was that they were bringing a play from Argentina, and they were desperate for Latino audiences all of a sudden, and they were hoping that I could plug them into audiences. And my answer, well, I know one Argentinian, I can ask him to go and see the production. Of course I know more. I was just being hard on this person because I thought it was so inappropriate the way that out of the blue you get these phone calls, right, or these emails for people who have never expressed any interest in you. So I have a dream that I'll share right now and then I'll shut up, which is to have this boss, hire a boss and a great driver, and we'll take, let's say, a Pregones audience, and we drive over to Mayi to see Mayi's play, and then Mayi puts all of their audiences on your play and goes to see the Pregones, and then we go to Mary, and then we go, that I just think that there's such power in our audience and such potential to feed each other until the weight of that presence is felt in such ways that we cannot be ignored anymore by those mainstream forces that are important in terms of the so many careers. But anyway, that's my dream. I'll let you know how that goes.
Thank you. I do want to be cognizant of our time, and if anyone in our audience on Facebook Live has questions, please do enter them. But we'll continue our conversation, which many of you have touched on, and Rosalba was just getting at as well, which is what might some advice be for a theater company trying to put on a work perhaps outside of what they're accustomed to doing, or how, which is kind of a two-part question with how do we get even our audiences, right, to explore different types of theater. So are there some kind of strategies or suggestions or dreams? I like the car driving from one place to another. This makes me very happy. But are there some ideas, especially to help people who are allies and who do want to extend and try something new, whether in form or structure or by background and so forth? Or do we have some suggestions for our viewers?
Yeah, I feel like, and I think, again, this is me talking like sometimes as a director, but like, I think that audiences can be adventurous, right? And there's this idea oftentimes that I think we as artists, and then like those people who work like full time at institutions, like to put on audiences. I think especially, I grew up in Texas. Like my understanding of like theater in distress is like looking at a regional theater having to pivot to like recession programming. And so recession programming is like a thing that I think is still has its claws in. And I think recession audiences and like recession season planning is still such a prevalent thing, especially outside of the city. Like, I think you need to trust your audiences more and trust that, like, even if some of them might not like the thing you're programming, they're still gonna come back, right? Like, and that's really like that's the thing about the subscription model, right? Like most of these people have already bought tickets to like all 5 of your shows. And even if they don't come to see, the next thing after the thing that maybe like shook them, like you still got that money in your pocket, you're gonna be all right, right? Like, and the worst thing you have to deal with is like a phone call from someone who doesn't know how to use email at like 5:45 p.m. and it won't be you, it'll be your front of house person dealing with it, right? Like, let's just be honest about like the conversation. And so I think that like really being able to say, I am going to produce this play, and I am going to trust that if my audience doesn't get it, there will be an audience who does. And then I think to the question of like producing plays outside of your scope, the great thing about like a call like this is, right, it's showing people that the work is already happening, right? That the work that like you don't have to do any of this stuff like from the ground up. There are people who are already doing it. And so I think if you can avoid, as an artistic director, sending your assistants to call the other artistic director, there might be something good that can happen, right? Like if you understand that like the ground you are deciding to trot on is ground that is a foundation that has been laid for a long time, and that the people doing the work are already like they have the resources, they are already probably better at it than you. And that if you come honestly, and if you come with a willingness to not just like do this one Asian, to do this one Latinx, do this one Black show, like at the end of your season, because they love to stick us at the end of the season, right before the summer, so it won't matter. Like, I think that you will see better results, especially when you learn how to move out of the way, right? Because the people on this call know what they're doing. Maybe just give us the money to do it. It's maybe this goes back to the thing Mary was talking about with Funder. It's like just give me the shit. And like you move, please.
You're absolutely right. I have to say, our collaborations program and our presenting program has proven your point, Dominique, in so many times, so many occasions. We're celebrating this year 27th relationship with our friends in Appalachian Kentucky mountains, and to have a whole following for grass for music, for Appalachian music and country music. I'm telling you, when they come to Pregones, they come to Pregones, it's amazing. When we go to the mountains, it's amazing. You know, it's something different for them. It's something different for us, because we owe it to our audiences to give them the broadest perspective possible. One of our amazing afternoons was our partners from Slovakia a few years ago when they came. It's a group of artists with different physical abilities and challenges, and it's an amazing company in Slovak. And the theater was packed and people just did not want to leave. The experience was so full. And the same when we have presented from each other, right, from our various other communities of color and theaters of color throughout the country, our Chicano partners, of course, brothers and sisters forever. People develop this taste and they expect the excellence of that type of programming after a while. And then so we owe it to each other also to open our doors to each other in that way.
Yeah, I really want to jump on like the collaboration celebration train, because there's also like, it's come up so many times in this conversation about like, there are people doing the work so that actually it's not so insurmountable to take on some of these works. And like one of my dreams is, we produce an industry resource every year. It's the Expand the Canon list. Comes out of tons and tons of reading and tons of work to say like, here are 9 plays. They're classics. They're by women. They are timely, excellent, producible. Like, just go do one of these. Like, you don't have to read 200 plays like we did. Just like, scan through the pitches of these 9 and we'll tell you what the casting breakdown is. What I really want, because I see on my Google Analytics, I know how many people come to the page. I know how many people are downloading the scripts. I know how many people are looking at it. I want everyone to then reach out to us and say like, hey, like we're excited about doing this play. We heard about it on your list. Not because I want to take credit for you. I don't need to like, you don't need to pay me money to do it. We do this as a service to the field, but because the like collaborative conversation is so important. It's so important for us to know when the work is working. It's so important for us to be able to say, oh, these 30 theater companies programmed something off of our list last year. And it's not because we want to take credit. It's because we like want to celebrate you in the work and celebrate that the work is happening in a larger way too. So, that abundance mindset of the audience, it's like the same abundant mindset of collaboration and like how we can keep lifting each other up.
Yeah, I think a huge part of what we do with our collaborations, especially on our live shows, is we make sure that community outreach is a huge part of it. And that's what I'd say to, larger PWI institutions, is be intentional with both who you bring into the room and who you bring into the cast, but who you bring into the audience, and understand that, the audience that you might bring in might not help you make the biggest profit you ever got, but it is like important that, the people that are represented on stage also get to see the play. It's important, people like me and my fellow students when I was in high school, we wouldn't have seen those shows if we hadn't gotten those tickets through our public school. It's a question of making sure you are accessible to as wide a range of people as possible, and that means like structurally, logistically, financially, you have to be willing to take a risk on maybe losing some money out of it. Maybe you won't sell a full house of full price tickets for that performance, but you will bring in people who A, would not normally get to attend these performances, and B, they deserve to see themselves on stage, and they deserve to see their own communities on stage. And I think that that's a huge part of, it's a huge challenge to that is obviously that, every single theater, profit or nonprofit, in some way is beholden to make a profit to survive. And that's a problem not of our own making, but of the, of capitalism at large. But within that, if you are able to, you have to take the financial risk, and you have to be willing to sacrifice a little bit of that capital to be to bring in those audiences, and to not only expand the canon on stage, but off stage and in the audience and in the world. And that means, addressing not only the issues within the theater, but also, the issues that might prevent audiences from attending the theater, or people from joining in the industry. These are just considerations that have to be taken, and some of that might interfere with the accumulation of capital, and that's just something that I think a lot of larger institutions are going to have to wrestle with.
And just to like jump off that point really, really quick, Jessie, right? And then the other part of it is don't just reach out to me when you're doing the Black play, because the thing about the Black play at your theater is it has to be good, because if it's not, you'll never do another one, right? Reach out to me about that white play that's coming after it, because I want to see if that's good too, because it's not going to be half as good, because it doesn't have to be. So there also is a way in which, right, like that sort of the outreach of only inviting us in when you're doing a show by us, right? When you're doing a show by us, right? Like also eludes the rest of the season, because you get to pat yourself on the back and be like, oh yeah, we got all these Black people in here for XYZ person of color show, right? But then for the Annie Baker that's coming up, you don't want me in the audience? I like Annie Baker. You know that, like, and I want to see a good play, right? Like, so I think that like you also need to be doing that outreach. One of the problems of community engagement and outreach is like it's only sometimes once a year. It needs to be a full year-long thing and a commitment to getting people in those rooms for the Annie Baker plays, right? For the Asian plays, for the Black plays, for the Latinx plays, for all of them, so that your audience, I don't know, won't just be dying. Like if we like to put it frankly, right? That you will be able to have an audience 5, 10, 20 years from now.
I wanted to speak a little bit to maybe any independent artists that are watching, because sometimes you feel as an artist, well, what can I do, right? And just so that everyone knows, the Soul Project is not a theater company either. It was an initiative that was started, and everyone in the collective has a different background as far as their role, right, in the theater. Some are directors, designers, writers, actors. So we all kind of bring that knowledge to the Soul Project. And the Soul Project does partner with off-Broadway companies to get plays produced, but our mission is to make sure that when we're in those conversations, right, that we are creating a safe environment, right, for the team and for that particular play. We encourage commissions. We encourage introductions to maybe other playwrights or directors that organization may not know. But for independent artists, I can't say enough how much I learned with NALAC, the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, with their Leadership Institute and their Advocacy Institute, because as an individual, you can do so much change in other ways, right? In policy making. During the pandemic, I became an equity delegate and did a convention. And so now going forward, pregnancy discrimination is going to be written in like everything. So sex, gender discrimination, including pregnancy and medical related issues, is going to be in all casting notices. It's going to be in our contracts. Caregiving in your budgets, it's so important. Like Jessie said, also for medical emergencies, and for artists to be valued and to be taken care of, so that we could do our work and feel supported is so important. So if you are in a place where you can do that, theater making is great, but also take care of the individual, because once those things are taken care of, you're going to see these amazing stuff being created, which kind of has happened, right, in the past year and a half, because people have been able to be with their families. They've had the time and they've been able to focus on their work. It's been a really rough year in other ways, but it's also been a very creative time for certain people. So as an individual independent artist, there are so many ways that you can move this forward that you may not think of. Just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you so much. And as we close out our time, a question I had posed but before we started, which is nearly impossible to answer in one breath, was what is a play, or who is a playwright that you think is extraordinary that doesn't get the attention deserved? And I'm going to be terrible and cap you to 3. So you can mention a play, a playwright. I know, I'm terrible. A designer, a director, whomever it might be, but so that we can offer some suggestions to our viewers. So I know the list could go on a long time, but if you have some artists and art that you'd like to recommend here that's moved you, and you can say something about that too, or why more people should know about them.
Okay.
I'm not going to answer that question, but I am going to put a question that came in Facebook that kind of might be related. The question was traveling theater groups that are bringing work to the people, because a lot of us spoke about plays that maybe we saw and that spoke to us. So maybe they wanted to hear thoughts about maybe traveling theater groups, just in case that spurs any inspiration. And
I'll tie it all together. Here are 3 plays that I think should tour the country that are deserving and amazing. So I do think that touring is a really, really great way to access communities that don't have, the richness of New York City's cultural scene here. That's awesome. The Expand the Canon list is all about identifying the playwrights that we think are really deserving and have been under-recognized in their life. So I'll just say 3 plays and playwrights that I really want to see kind of make their way across the United States. Alice Childress' Wedding Band. Just, if you haven't seen it, if you haven't read it, just do, because it's exceptional. Then I'm going to say Forging the Truth by Yang Zhang, which currently you can see a reading of virtually in partnership with Mayi Theater on the internet right now for the next 3 days. And this beautiful playwright, Marusha Villalta, who is really well known in Mexico, but not in the United States. And there is a reading of a translation of her work also happening right now in partnership with SolFest that is currently available for, I think, another day and a half. So check that out too. These are plays that everyone should know, and they're excellent writers. Check them out.
Yeah, okay. Mary did like a good thing where she named a writer I was gonna name, so I don't have to name Alice Childress. And Wedding Band is getting a co-pro between Classics and Theater for a New Audience next year, directed by Owoye Vitempo. So I'm gonna give three writers, and I'm gonna give why I think you should check them out, and it may be your interest. I'm gonna say Aisha Rahman. If you're interested in how theater should maybe be more like jazz, I think she's a writer you should check out. Theodore Ward, if you're interested in the relationship between Black people and communism, and why the Black tradition is also a communist tradition, definitely check out Theodore Ward. And last, I'm going to say Bill Gunn, because I think the Black experimentalist tradition doesn't get talked about a ton. Like when we think about experimental theater, we're usually thinking about like white people rolling around in honey or something, like something really like silly. But if you're looking for plays that are formulaically expansive with a writer who is really trying to like push what form can be, you should check out Bill Gunn.
I'll name three, one of which Mai is partnering with Soho Rep on next year. That is Wolf Play by Hansel Zhang. But Hansel's work in general is just so inventive and dynamic and beautifully paced and funny and moving. And Wolf Play was supposed to happen in March 2020, and then a thing happened. So we're really, really excited that gets to come back. I'd also say Sonia Flew by Melinda Lopez is one of my favorite shows. I got to see that. I was in college, and I was in high school. I saw a production of it at Wellesley with Melinda, and that was one of my favorite experiences ever. It's a beautiful play. Lastly, I'd say Paris by Emily Booth. If you haven't seen or read it, it's an amazing play that I think really, really tackles working class issues and issues of labor that in just like a really, really powerful but almost beautifully understated kind of way. And I think if you do not know those plays, highly recommend. Also, Forging the Truth. Go watch that until September 23rd. Oh my God, that came so organically.
Well, I want to say that I had warned everyone that I would not be mentioning anybody because that I can't sleep when I don't mention if I leave someone behind. But I do want to say the following, which is, of course, any one of my years. I mean, any one of the works done by this group of people, right here is something that we need to pay attention to. But also, I want to, and Adriana would relate to this because you talked about it, and when you mentioned it, I said, wait a minute, this is what I would love to plug in. The Encuentro, was to be the Encuentro 2021, which was the festival created by LATC Los Angeles Theater Company in Los Angeles, and Latinx National Festival is going to be done online in November. And from the 12th to the 19th, and there you can see a whole collection of some of the outstanding voices of Latino theater today, and I hope that that would be like almost like a one-stop, right? One place where you can see it is all virtual. One of the productions I directed with Paul Flores that in San Francisco, that opened in Yerba Buena, and then came to Gala in DC and to Pregones. We have it is part of it, but the real reason I'm plugging the Encuentro is because it's such an effort and such a serious curatorial process that I think that you would be, you love it. It's called Encuentro 2021. They will be publishing very soon the actual program. So hopefully, you'll see it, and then eventually then we'll get that train, that express train to go through all of our theaters. And I want to give a shout out to Sol Project because you also, what you have done over the past years, and along with other playwrights projects, is what is bringing this whole collective sort of like a massive type of voice, and so that these playwrights are not alone, don't feel alone, and begin to understand what their possibilities, capabilities, and actual rights are in our industry. So thank you.
I want to second Reencuentro. I am part of the committee, and we are so excited about making public all the stuff that's going to be happening during that time. There's going to be solo performances and panels, and it's just going to be such a great time for conversation in November. And of course, I want to mention the 2 stage readings that are happening this week at the Pregones PRTT location in Midtown. So we're doing The War I Know by Dominique, and we are doing La Greña by Julissa Contreras. It's a very special moment because it's both of our first in-person event. And it's been so great to be able to announce those stage readings for an in-person event. So if anyone who is watching wants to go, there are links to RSVP because there will be limited capacity, of course. We're following the New York State mandate currently, so make sure to bring your vaccination card and masks. But it's going to be so exciting, and I really look forward for anyone who shows up. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Thank you so much to our viewers and to our panelists, all who are coming from different organizations, theaters, and movements, right, for contributing to this conversation of how we honor and amplify a diverse group of voices and the theater that's already being made and the theater that is going to come. So I thank all of you for this conversation, and I'm certain it will continue in our different venues and through the rest of SolFest as this wonderful time continues on. So thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.